Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 91, and my name is Janet Szabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. We are in the middle of August, and I am drowning in zucchini and cucumbers and tomatoes and potatoes. The pigs and the chickens get the zucchini that I forgot to pick, and they get to be the size of baseball bats, but it's extra food for the animals, so that works out well. I will tell you what sewing projects I've been working on, but I'll also tell you that I'm battling a terrible case of startitis right now, and I'm not quite sure whether it's because I'm bored with my projects. I don't think so. I think maybe I'm just seeing a whole bunch of new stuff out there that I want to try, and it's all kind of piling up. I worked on a few things last week. I actually took a painting class on Tuesday. I have a friend who lives in the neighborhood. She's a snowbird, so she lives in Dallas-Fort Worth during the winter and comes up here during the summer, and she is a nationally known oil painter. Her name is Sunny LeBlanc, and she and my friend Robin and I went to Spokane a couple of weeks ago, and last week we had painting class at her house. We did this last summer as well. That was the last time I painted, and I really do enjoy painting with oil paints. I just don't make the time to do it. I have never really considered myself an artist. I can't draw to save my life. But there is something I really enjoy about oil painting, and I'm relatively okay at it. I'm very hard on myself. My teachers, because it was Sunny and another friend of ours named Linda Lee, who's also a painter, they kept telling me to have a little more grace for myself, but that was my type A personality coming out. So it's just fun and interesting to do something creative that isn't in the area where you're usually being creative. I really felt like it was forcing me to use a different part of my brain and look at things a little bit differently. We were painting en plein air, which means we were outside. And being in Montana, we have some stunning landscapes. So there is always a lot to paint. I keep telling myself that I need to make time to do this more often. I also made myself another top using what I'm calling my perfect woven tee pattern. I made it using some rayon batik that I got at our local quilt store, I think last summer. It's been marinating in the stash for a while. I made some more samples for the store on my serger. I'm trying to make just some sample cards that show the capabilities of the different sergers. And as part of that, I also played around with a pattern that I bought at the Quilting Bee when we were in Spokane a couple of weeks ago. And the pattern is for a crazy quilt pillow. You could also use the panel that you make for a tote bag or something else, but the instructions were to create a pillow. And I'm not going to tell you the name of the pattern or the designer because I don't want to be petty about this, but that pattern was a huge disappointment. It is riddled with formatting errors and technical errors and instructions that don't really make good sense. The whole thing really needs to be looked over by a proofreader or better yet a technical editor. I tend to have fairly high standards when it comes to patterns. I've written over 100 knitting patterns, and while errors are impossible to avoid completely, I don't think it's acceptable to be selling a pattern for upwards of $15 that has 5 or 6 errors in it. That just seems unacceptable to me. I did finish the panel. It's a crazy quilt type piece using the flat lock stitch on your serger. I still have to make the backing for the panel, and I want to put piping in it, so I have to make the piping. I have the fabric for that. So I've got a little bit more work to do on this before it becomes an actual pillow, and then it will probably go to the quilt store just as a display sample. I had been hoping that maybe I could make a class out of it, but not with that pattern. So I'm going to offer it to the store for a display sample just to give people an idea of what they could do with their sergers. As I said, I've got a terrible case of startitis right now, but I am going to force myself to finish some things before I pull out any new patterns. I'm kind of itching to make some tote bags, but we'll see. I need to make one more muslin of that dress pattern, the Amarena dress from Liesl & Co. I modified it. That was the topic of an episode a couple of weeks ago, and I just want to make sure that I have a perfect pattern before I cut into the good fabric. So that, I think, is on the list, on the schedule for today after I record this podcast. So that's what's been happening here. And on this episode, I thought I would talk about quilting rulers. I'm teaching my Rulerwork class again at the store. It's a series of 4 classes. I do them once a month, and I did them back at the beginning of the year. And we got a request to do them again. So this week, I'll be doing the straight edge rulers, and I thought now would be a good time to talk about ruler work on either your domestic machine or a longarm machine. I will tell you that as a quilter, my favorite parts of the process when I started were piecing. I am just not as much into the quilting part of it as I am the design and piecing part of it. So I would get a whole bunch of quilt tops made and then have no way to quilt them. I did do several on my Janome 6600P. I did mostly walking foot quilting or straight line quilting because I just didn't have a good setup to do free motion quilting on that machine. When it worked out, I sometimes took my tops over to my friend Tara's house. She has a gamel and has a great setup, and we quilted a couple of quilts at her place, including the one that happens to be on my bed at the moment. It's a king-size quilt. So I decided that I needed to address that bottleneck, and I went to the quilt store and tried out the Bernina Q20 about 4 years ago and absolutely fell in love with it. So I bought one. And my setup is not, my machine is not on a frame. It's in a horn lift table. And I chose that setup for 2 reasons. First is I don't really have a good space for a frame. And the second reason is that I was more comfortable with a stationary machine head and moving the fabric than I was with stationary fabric and moving the machine head, if that makes any sense. I tried quilting on a long arm machine where I was moving the head of the machine, and it just wasn't comfortable. But the minute I sat down at the table version of the Q20 and was moving the fabric, that was much easier for me. So if you're thinking about getting a long arm machine, you might want to try both setups and see which one you're more comfortable with. So my Q20 is down here in my office. I have it stationed in front of the window in my office that looks out over the street. And my office is also right off the kitchen, so it's a good setup. A lot of times I'll be in here quilting while I'm cooking dinner or working on dinner. I have done both free motion quilting and Rulerwork quilting on it, and I absolutely fell in love with Rulerwork. So let's talk about what makes Rulerwork quilting Rulerwork. And obviously it's rulers. So in free motion quilting, you're just moving the fabric or moving the machine head and you're making free motion designs. With Rulerwork, you're using an acrylic ruler to guide the foot of the machine so that you get a specific design. And it doesn't have to be a straight edge design. Rulers come in all sorts of shapes and designs. And the undisputed queen of ruler work, I believe, is Amanda Murphy, who is associated with Bernina. She has designed several dozen different kinds of rulers in all sorts of shapes. I have every ruler that she's ever designed. Everything from straight edges to hearts, to stars, to waves, to feathers, to clamshells. If it's a quilting design, she's probably got a ruler for it. And I should note that she likes to call them templates. She started out calling them rulers, and then a year or two ago, she started referring to them as templates. I'm going to refer to them as rulers. I think of it as ruler work, but just be aware of that distinction. She certainly isn't the only person or company to have created quilting rulers. Angela Walters has some. Westerly makes them. Handy Quilter makes them. Bernina has several sets of rulers. I just like the Amanda Murphy rulers because she's put a lot of thought into the markings on the rulers and the registration lines that allow you to line up your ruler with a previous line of quilting so that you can keep your quilting straight. Quilting rulers are similar to cutting rulers in that they're made out of acrylic, but quilting rulers tend to be much thicker. So for the long arm machines, they will be 1/4 of an inch thick. For the domestic machine, they will be a little bit thinner, but still thicker than a cutting ruler. Unfortunately, there aren't quite as many rulers available for domestic ruler work quilting as there are for long arm ruler work quilting. But check your machine and check your manual, because I know that some of the Bernina machines, for example, even though they're domestic machines, they do use the long arm templates or the long arm rulers. You just want to be very sure that you're using the correct ruler for your machine so that you don't damage your machine. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Why would you choose ruler work over free motion quilting for a design? The answer to that question is complicated, and it certainly doesn't have to be one or the other. You can combine ruler work quilting with free motion quilting on the same quilt, and that has been done with great success. Some of it will depend on the design of the quilt top. I find that it's not really a hard and fast rule that a geometric design is going to benefit from ruler work quilting. Sometimes a heavily geometric design needs to be broken up with free motion quilting in a loop pattern or something really curvy, just as a contrast. I spend a lot of time looking at my quilt tops before I quilt them, and I ask myself, what does this quilt top or what does this section of the quilt top need to really enhance it and bring it to life? And sometimes that's ruler work quilting, and sometimes that's free motion quilting. Amanda Murphy also has several books on ruler work quilting, and I'll often flip through those to get some ideas. In addition to a machine and the rulers, you're also going to need a ruler foot. This is a specialized presser foot that I think looks kind of like a free motion foot on steroids, at least on my machine. It's round like a free motion foot, but it's much thicker and deeper. So mine is about 1/4 of an inch deep, or the height of it, from the surface of the quilt to the top. And it's that part that rides against the ruler. So that's why the ruler work rulers are 1/4 of an inch thick, because that foot is about 1/4 of an inch tall. and you want there to be good contact between the foot and the ruler. So if you have a Bernina, you'll want the 72 foot or the 72S. The 72S has a slit in the foot so that you can bring the thread down. It's just a little refinement in the design of the foot that makes quilting easier. So if you've been wanting to try Rulerwork but you're not quite sure how to get started, I will tell you how I teach my series of classes. And the first session is on straight line quilting. I have my students make a couple of quilt sandwiches about 12 inches by 12 inches using just a plain cotton fabric like Kona with a layer of quilt batting in between. And this is a great use for those scraps of quilt batting that you've got. Get yourself a straight edge ruler. Amanda Murphy has one called Every Angle. She's got another one called Every Angle Plus that has little hooks on it. I would say if you're going to get one, get the Every Angle Plus. She's also got a new one out called the Multi-Tool, which does straight lines and some basic curves. I think Angela Walters' straight line one is called Slim. The Bernina Basic Ruler Set has a straight line ruler in it. Any of those will work because all we're going to be doing is making straight lines, and you will be amazed at how many designs you can make just with straight lines. It's pretty astonishing. If you're not ready to take the training wheels off and just go for it, then by all means take a chalk pencil or a disappearing ink marker and make a design or a couple of designs on your quilt sandwich. I have my students block it off into different sections. So in one section we will do diamonds, in another section we might do bricks, in another section we might do a different design. But there is absolutely nothing wrong with drawing out the design on the fabric ahead of time. If you're worried about the ink washing out or not coming out, use chalk. We've experimented with a lot of different marking tools in my classes, and the chalk marker and the disappearing ink marker seem to be the two favorites. I have to laugh though because I've got an air erase marker, and if I don't mark it and quilt it within about 5 minutes, the line disappears. And I've had that happen to me when I've been working on a quilt. Now, I want you to get into the habit of not having the ruler anywhere near the foot when you're bringing the foot down onto the fabric and pulling up your bobbin thread. Just don't have it anywhere near that foot, because if you bring that foot down on top of the ruler, you run the risk of getting your machine out of time, and that can be a potentially costly fix, as well as put your machine out of commission for a couple of weeks. So just get into the habit of not having that ruler anywhere near the foot until you are ready to start quilting. When you're ready to begin your quilting, you'll lower your presser foot, bring up your bobbin thread, and then you can move the ruler into position against the ruler foot. This is going to be tricky to remember, and it'll take you a while to get used to this. You're not putting the ruler on the line that you want to quilt. You're putting the ruler 1/4 of an inch away from the line that you want to quilt. And depending on what design you're quilting, that can be hard to remember because you're thinking about the quilting line, not where you're putting the ruler. But you have to think about both. Another habit that you want to get into is not moving the fabric or the machine head until you have started quilting. Sometimes I'll find that I get a little ahead of myself and I'll start moving the fabric before the machine really engages, and I'll get what are called jump stitches. They're a little bit longer. My machine also has 2 different settings depending on whether I'm doing free motion quilting or ruler work quilting. When I have it in ruler work mode, When I stop quilting or stop moving the fabric, the needle stops going up and down. If I have it in regular mode and I stop moving the fabric, the needle keeps going up and down. So check your machine and see if it's got similar settings. I should mention here that, again, I'm quilting on a table. If you are quilting on a domestic machine or you're quilting on a long arm, you're going to need some kind of support underneath the quilt. On a domestic machine, you might set your table up so that you have a flat bed so that the bed of your machine is flush with the table. If you can't do that, then you might want to get a Sew Steady table or something similar. And I would suggest getting as large a table as you possibly can. If you're on a long arm, depending on the machine, the brand of the machine, there's going to be some kind of a table or an extension that you can put underneath to support the ruler while you're doing the ruler work. As with any new technique, have a little grace for yourself and don't be too critical of it. When the entire quilt is quilted, it's just going to be beautiful. Nobody's going to be picking out the places where you might have wiggled a little bit. Another technique that I have my students do is to use a cheater print. So go to your quilt store and ask them if they have any cheater prints. Laundry Basket Quilt has a couple. Sherry and Chelsea from Moda have a couple of cheater prints. They might be star prints, they might be Dresden's. And if you can't find a cheater print, find a print that's a really geometric print, so maybe one that's made up of squares. And make a quilt sandwich out of that print and then try quilting around the motifs. It'll give you a sense of what it's like to quilt on a quilt without having to make up a patchwork or a little mini quilt of your own. If you want to do that, that's also a great way to do it. You could do a quilt sandwich made up of 2.5-inch squares put together. So 25 squares, and then make a quilt sandwich. And then you can practice both stitching in the ditch with the quilt ruler as well as stitching 1/4 of an inch away from the seams, which is another technique that I often use. Amanda Murphy also has a couple of cheater prints, and I think Angela Walters does as well, where you can buy the print and actually use her rulers, Amanda's rulers, to practice quilting on it. Don't be afraid of the rulers. As long as you have a good, solid grip on the ruler, you should be fine. I typically hold the ruler with my left hand, and I have to push down fairly hard on it because I don't want it sliding around the fabric. If the ruler isn't frosted or doesn't have some kind of grippy stuff on the bottom of it, you can buy grips to put on it to help it to keep it from sliding around the fabric while you're quilting. It's one of those things where you're going to wish you had 3 hands, but you will get used to it. It comes pretty quickly. Let's say that you are feeling comfortable with those straight line rulers and you're ready to branch out. The next rulers that I have my students try are ones that involve curves. So clamshells or waves or circles, although I like to have students do semicircles first because doing an entire circle can be a little bit tricky. So I think it's a little better to start with something like waves or clamshells. Clamshells make great overall designs. Waves are wonderful for borders or as an overall design. If you're feeling especially adventurous, Amanda Murphy has a set of rulers to do Baptist fans. This is where I would really recommend making a 9-patch quilt sandwich, maybe with some 3 or 4-inch squares. Just make a 9-patch, slap a quick border around it, make a quilt sandwich out of it, and practice doing your circles inside those squares. You can learn how to do orange peels. That's a great quilting pattern for block heavy designs. I will tell you that sometimes it takes some experimenting to find the correct size ruler to go with the size block that you have. Amanda Murphy's rulers tend to come in sets of different sizes, so she's got a set of circles that are maybe 2.5 inch, 3.5 inch, 4.5 inch, and 5.5 inch. And that way you can choose the appropriate circle for the size that you're quilting. Again, just remember that your eye tends to fill in missing pieces. So if something's not exactly perfect, you can still get away with using it. And I also want to mention that in addition to doing an all-over design with a ruler or filling in an area or making a design in a border, you can also quilt motifs with a ruler. So let's say you want to fill in an open area with some kind of a sunburst design. If you take a template, and again, I know that there's one that Handy Quilter put out, and Amanda Murphy also has one where you can draw lines at 90-degree angles or at 60-degree angles, and then you just rotate the ruler around that star that you've drawn with the intersecting lines, and you make a sunburst motif. I'm not explaining it well. It would be much easier to show you, but if you do a little research for some quilting designs, I think you'll get a sense of what I'm talking about. After we've done straight lines and circles, I like to introduce my students to different kinds of border designs. And I'll tell you, my favorite border design, without exception, is ribbon candy. Amanda Murphy has several ribbon candy templates in various sizes, and I often default to ribbon candy in my borders just because it's quick and easy, and I love the way that it looks. You get just a lot of bang for the buck. Another one that I've used in borders that I also like are Amanda Murphy's mini lollipop rulers. And of course, there are always waves. Bernina and Handy Quilter both have cable rulers. So if you like cable designs in your borders, I would use those rulers. There are lots and lots of opportunities to be creative with your borders and with your sashing. One of the techniques that I really like to use on baby quilts is Amanda Murphy has a set of star rulers, and I will quilt kind of a meandering line, but I'll stop every couple of inches and I'll quilt a star with one of the star rulers. And then I'll continue with a meandering line and I'll stop and I'll quilt a star. And that just makes a really cute overall design on a baby quilt. I've done the same thing using her daisy ruler as well. I'm going to mention here that I have seen rulers on Amazon for free motion quilting. So they're actually rulers that let you quilt a free motion design like squiggles or meanders or stippling. The ones I've seen have all been for domestic machines. They are 3 millimeters thick, not 6 millimeters thick, so they aren't necessarily something that you could use on a long arm or would want to use on a long arm. I mention them because they're out there, and I know that some people like to use those, so that's certainly a way you could go too. So when it comes to quilting a quilt using rulers, again, there's no right or wrong way to do it. Amanda Murphy does give the advice that when you start out, you should quilt the bones. That's what she calls it, quilting the bones of the quilt to stabilize the quilt before you start adding other ruler work or additional embellishments. And again, remember that it doesn't have to be one way or the other. You absolutely can combine ruler work with free motion quilting, and you can get some absolutely stunning designs doing that. So hopefully that overview will give you a place to start if ruler work is something you've been wanting to try, but you're not quite sure how to get started. Again, all you need to get started is a straight line ruler, and truly you will be amazed at the number of designs you can create just using that ruler. I will put a list of all of my favorite resources in the show notes, and let me know if you take the leap and start playing around with Rulerwork in some of your own quilt designs. You may have seen on Instagram this past week that we're trying to get a sense of what listeners want. I've had a couple of requests for email notifications for both the blog posts and the podcast episodes. So if that's something that you would like me to implement, let me know. I think we can do it fairly easily and not too expensively. I have someone who helps me with my social media, and she says that she thinks that we can implement it, but we'd like to know how much interest there is. So you can always go over to Instagram and take the poll. If you'd prefer, you can send an email. I'm also soliciting questions for the 100th episode that's coming up. I'm going to feature listener questions, and I've gotten quite a few this past week. So keep those coming. You can give me feedback using the fan mail feature, or you can email me at janet@janetzabo.com. You can leave a comment on the show notes page. I do try to respond personally to all the emails that I get. It might take me a day or two, but you will hear from me. The show notes for each episode can be found at the podcast website, which is www.thestraightstitchpodcast.com. My website is www.janetzabo.com, and that has links to my Big Sky Knitting Designs website as well as to my blog, where I post pictures of what I've been working on. Some of those also end up on Instagram, but the blog is a place where I can talk about what's happening in the neighborhood and what's happening on the farm. So I'd love to have you check that out as well. I've got a couple of interviews coming up in the next couple of weeks. I love to get suggestions about possible guests. Just know that not every suggestion is going to result in an interview, because either for scheduling reasons or because someone doesn't necessarily want to be a guest on a podcast, I can't always get people to agree, but those that I can, I will certainly get them on the schedule. So if you have a favorite maker that you'd like to have me interview, just let me know. And with that, I'm going to wish you a good week, and I hope that you get to go sew something.